people here. I just want to thank you for coming out tonight. Not dragging yourself away from March Madness and joining us. We appreciate it. You know, we're a 501c nonprofit. So at little events like this, these fundraisers are what help us keep the lights on and the doors open. So we really do appreciate you coming out. I want to thank right now some of our major sponsors who their generosity helps us quite a bit throughout the year. It's the Pankey Foundation, the Siegel Trust, Tustin Award, the Blue Boy Swim School, and Rick Nelson's Red Hill Winery. So we want to thank them for their generosity. One of our mission statement, one of them is that we collect and we preserve the history of the area, but we also, part of that mission is to share that history. And I think these nights at the museum are a great way to do that, and we're really excited about our speaker tonight. He's Scott T. Barnes. He grew up in a family farm in Julian. He earned a dual degree in journalism and Spanish from Cal State Fresno, and he has an MBA from Claremont Graduate School, and then an MA in publishing from Western Colorado University. He's a musician. He's a practitioner of Kenjutsu, which is Japanese sword fighting, which I just learned about. He's an award-winning author in the genre of fantasy and science fiction. And if all that's not enough, he's the CFO of Molten Corporation. So he's here tonight to share the story of his great-grandmother, Nellie Gail Moulton. So I'll quit talking and I'll let him. No.
All right. Well, thank you for that introduction. It does sound like I'm doing too much. I sound regularly. So in addition to those things, I am treasurer of Molten Museum. It's a lot like this museum, except we haven't been around as long. I'm sure we've only been there getting on 2 years. And it's a long story. I don't want to go into it because we don't have enough time. But the short story is when my great aunt passed away in '99. We found that she just had a treasure trove of antiques and documents and this and that. And all of that kind of snowballed into creating a museum, which is in Laguna Hills. And we'd love for you to come down sometime. We have some events like this in the evening. We have an upcoming paint and sip, which it can be a lot of fun. And this one is about Clara Mason Fox, who is a local. She did a lot of different things, but she did botanicals. And these are now held by Claremont University, Claremont Graduate University, I believe. And they actually use them to see what are native plants, what are invasive plants, this and that. She's never had a solo show. And we have a space like this, but we also have a gallery next to it where we have rotating painting exhibits. Clara Mason Fox was up yesterday. Curtis was there, and they had tequila sipping too. So we had a big crowd and a lot of fun. So if you want to come down, that's my advertisement. I have brochures with the address and so forth. We'd love to see you. Yeah, I brought some of my other books, just sort of housekeeping. I'm a fancy author. That's really my passion. So I often say I have one book out, and I'm like, oh wait. Well, anyway. So if you have young adult friends, relatives of your own, I have these. If you choose to buy anything, I'll donate everything to the Tustin Museum. In addition, I co-authored this, which is a children's book about Rancho San Felipe, so a rancho out in the desert, sort of on theme. And then these two about my family in Julian. These are oral histories. I chose to do oral histories, so it's an interview form, in other words, because I knew if I tried to write as a biography, my family would be arguing with me forever. But if I said this was what Grandma said, that was the end. So I didn't have to argue about it. Yeah, so it wasn't easy because I'm very persnickety, and so I would do the interviews over several years, often getting the same story with just a little turn of phrase differently, a little extra detail, and I couldn't just let it go with one version. I had to splice them together to make the best version. Anyway, all right. So why are we here talking? This is Nellie Gale Moulton is my great-grandmother on my mom's side, and we discovered in setting up, actually years after we set up the museum, going through thousands of documents, literally, we had 11,000, we have like 2,000 more now we've archived. We found she wrote her own memoir in about 68 to 70, okay? And we couldn't believe it, and it's basically a short book size, and so we decided we have to publish it. We've been editing it, we've added photos, around 100 photos. We put extensive endnotes, and we also discovered she wrote what she called a travel journal, because she traveled a lot. She traveled around the world several times, and this was back in the day when you had to take propeller planes and freighters and things like that. So it's really a hoot, and you learn a lot about Orange County history. So tonight I'm going to go over, an abbreviated version of what's in the book, illustrated with an abbreviated version of the photos that are in the book. So I hope that it's entertaining for you. So you probably have never even heard of Nellie Gale Moulton. So I thought I would do a little, why should I care? One day she crossed the plains in a covered wagon. Yes, there was a railroad, but not where she was going. So that's pretty interesting. At the beginning part of her life, they really lived hand to mouth, and we'll be going over that. She became a school teacher or principal, which was the most common way women could be professionals in her day, so it's very emblematic. She had quite a love story, and then when her husband passed away, she managed a 22,000-acre ranch. So, and I forgot to include the map, but there, Irvine Ranch that everybody knows that was like 88,000 acres. Touching that to the south was Moulton Ranch, which was Rancho Miguel, or Miguel, apparently was how you, apparently it's an Indian word, and that's how it should be pronounced. And the name changed to Moulton Ranch after the purchase. In addition, she founded the Laguna Playhouse. I think there were 2 or 3 other people. And Laguna College of Art and Design. She made the largest single donation to Chapman University. So you may know, driving south, there's something called Nellie Gale Ranch. That's named after her. So she actually, when the ranch was sold, she donated 250 acres to Chapman College. And they turned around and sold it to a developer, and then the developer put her name on it. So I think there have since been bigger donations, but it was until very recently. She was also a good plein air painter. I'm not going to claim she was a master, but she studied with the masters. Anna Hills, Edgar Payne, and William Witt were all teachers of hers, and they're all considered some of the best plein air painters who ever lived. And so we're blessed to have some of their work. Now, we have rotating shows in our gallery, but we have some of their work we show, and of course we have a lot of Nellie's work. Okay, so that's why she lived a pretty interesting life, and hopefully you find it as interesting as we do. This is how I remember Nellie Gale, and please forgive me, I put all my notes right on the slide, so some of these are like, why would he put that as the caption? Because I have to remember what I'm going to say. I met her in '72, right before she passed away, in her apartment. And it's funny because she made such an impression on me, I was 4, that just a couple of years ago, I'm like, I'm going to see if I can find her house. And I literally drove, I knew it was in 3 Arch Bay, but I just drove right to it. And I snapped a couple pictures, and then I took my mom there, who of course remembered it quite well. That was her grandmother. Indeed, it was that house. So that was the kind of impression she made on people. People remembered her. Quite a fascinating woman. Okay, Born in Irving, Kansas, and her parents were Prudence Stoneman and John Gale. And there were three sisters, Alta, born in 1874, Nellie, and then Carrie. Oop. Oh, don't touch. All right. So there's a lot of really fun and interesting anecdotes in the book. It's written in a very personal and personable style. And she talks about her flights. In her flight journal, she numbers them. And she calls the tornadoes that hit Irvine her first flight, because they literally picked her up twice. And the first time ripped her out of her mother's arms and threw her across the room. And the other time they were running to the cellar and it threw her several feet. She survived. I think there were about 18 people killed. It was a big event. You can Google it, find all kinds of news sources, stories about it. One of the kind of interesting things is that L. Frank Baum may have opened The Wizard of Oz with this anecdote. He definitely, there's a tornado. It almost certainly was inspired by this event. It was big news at the time. And Dorothy Gale died in it. And Dorothy Gale is the hero of The Wizard of Oz. It turns out he also knew another Dorothy Gale. So it's not certain he named this after the victim, or he may have known both. But kind of a fun little story. The Gale house was destroyed, and this incited them to move up to Horace, Kansas, as part of the Homestead Act. So if they could stay and farm and prove up a place for a certain amount of time, I think it was 5 years, they got title to the land. And my friend, who's sort of an economist, thinks that was the biggest boon to the middle class that the country had ever done. I would love to see something like that again. But anyway. So these are just some fun pictures of Carrie, the young one, and Nellie in costume. There was a lot of cosplay back then. I have tons of pictures of my dad's side of the family in costume about the same time. Yeah. But living in a sod house on the prairie turned out to be very difficult. There were prairie dogs, there were deer, there were buffalo, and there were some bad people as well. And they ended up only staying a little less than a year there. And I want to kind of get through to you guys with this talk how difficult life was in those days. I think most of us can't even imagine how hard those people worked just to feed themselves. If you don't mind, I'll read some of these quotes. I know you can read them, but I think they're from the book. She talks about mother's deep Christian faith sustained her in crisis. Mother and father never let each other stand alone. Always it was a family affair. This was the living, working creed of the pioneers, the undying spirit that built our nation. We were an infinitesimal part of it. And the pioneer spirit is our theme for Walton Museum. Interestingly, we chose that before we ever discovered the memoir, so we felt really good about it after we discovered that she brings that up several times, the pioneer spirit in the memoir. So they moved to the town of Horace, very close by, but unfortunately, Prudence got typhoid. She was 7 or 8. Tragedy was always around the corner in those days. There's some fun family pictures, including the parents with Nellie on the left for you, and then 3 girls a few years later on the right. If I'm not living long enough, let me know. I don't know how long this seems to be zooming through faster than I thought. But. Okay, so Horace didn't work out very well either. He was unable to make a living, and so they packed up. Well, and then Horace was bypassed for the county seat. because of some shenanigans with the railroad and this and that. You can read about it online, you know, but who knows what's exactly true. So they packed everything up in the covered wagon and went back to Irving, to family for a brief time, and then to Hebron, Nebraska. This is where she crossed the plains in a covered wagon. It was 445 miles to get to Irving, and then another jaunt to Hebron. And one of the interesting anecdotes I think would make a great movie is they started to be followed. And this is where these were not roads. There's a lot of just off trail trying to get from one place to another. And these two bandits, they were sure there were bandits after a couple days, were following them. And so Mr. Dale would try to stay awake all night and keep watch and everything. And one day, the bandits stole the horses, which could have been death out there for everybody. But he managed to, he actually talked to them and confronted them somehow. We don't know what was said. She was too young to be with them. But then he whistled as he was leaving, and the horses came running because he had trained them to come to this whistle. And they were able to get away. And for whatever reason, the bandits, maybe he had a gun or something, they didn't try anything else. So, saved by a whistle. In Hebron, he became a contractor. This is John Dale, Dad did. And everything was going well. They were making good money until gold fever got him. And he just picked up and left, like thousands and thousands of other people, with his, they did have relatives around. With his brother, she said, although I think it might be a brother-in-law. Anyway, they didn't make it far. They made it to Seattle, and there were tens of thousands of people on their way. It was probably too late to really strike anyway. It was probably the best thing. If you've ever read, like, James Michener's Alaska, or anything like that, probably thankful that they turned around in Seattle and had very little money. That was part of the problem. I think you had to have 1 or 2 tons of supplies, or the not the Mounties, but whatever, the Rangers would not let you go on the trail at all because it was certain death. So they didn't even get that far. But he was robbed on the way home, so he had to wire for money. So not only did he spend all of his money, and he wasn't making money, he came home with less than nothing. But maybe things happen for a reason. Alta, her sister, started taking up painting and singing, and she got engaged, so things were looking good for her. And Alta became quite a good painter. We discovered some of her works, similar to Nellie. Probably inspired Nellie. And there's Alta. Music was a big part of the day. They didn't have cell phones, so a lot of people sang. In these oral histories, they talk about how the whole family would gather around the piano, and this was very common, that people would just sing on the Saturday night or Friday night or whatever. So, and in front is the fiancé on the horn. So, I love that picture. I think I got this out of order. Yes, so anyway, that is the World's Fair. It's actually called the World's Columbia's Exposition, 1893. This was a huge event for the country. It was the biggest celebration the country had ever tried to put on. And the family went there. Things were going very well for them at this time. It was to celebrate the 400th anniversary of Columbus reaching the country. I know he's out of fashion right now, but he was still very much revered in those days. Columbia University may not remember what they're named after, but anyway, famous architects just transformed this giant area into what became known as the White City, with I think 14 buildings. And I don't want to read all of this because you've already read most of it, but I'll read the last part. The fair had something for everyone. It was raucous. It was pomp and circumstance, parades, music, flowers, flags, fireworks. Mother and I were naturally and irresistibly drawn to the galleries. It was a particular thrill for me for the schools taking part when my own works was displayed at the Children's Center. We don't have that, unfortunately, but they had 27 million visitors, all of which have been torn down except the Palace of Fine Arts. There was a giant Ferris wheel, and it was a great event.
Do you know where that painting is? You don't have it?
I don't have it. I don't know what it was of or anything. Yeah, unfortunately. But at the same time, her mother had typhoid. She was getting worse. Alta and her husband went on their honeymoon to Chicago World's Fair, and Alta caught a cold and never recovered. So, as Nellie says, it may have been that she tried to do too much while the family were away, and with the excitement and preparation for the coming nuptials, had run herself into a weakened condition. There had also been a discomfiture in rail traveling, for in those days it wasn't exactly a pleasant way to get to one's destination. Trains were run by coal, windows had to be kept open, the soot from the steam engine streaming into the coaches. So Alta got very sick, and her mother, reacting to that, went downhill fast too. So the celebration became tragic in a hurry. But again, I don't know if things happen for a reason, but things, how would you say it? I didn't find this ahead of time, but when things happen, they can switch your entire destiny pretty quick. So the doctors suggested Alta go to California for her health. And without that, I don't think any of the family would have ended up here. Prudence passed away the year later. That was Mom. But Alta and her husband moved to Covina, California. And again, Dad wants a little freedom or something. He has the kids come out to stay with Alta and Arthur, and he stays home. I don't know. It's like boarding school. So they started attending school here, but Alta's not getting better, and Nellie basically said they ended up taking care of her and not the other way around. So Carrie and I came out to be with Alta, but it turned out that for the three of us, Carrie, Father, and myself, it was another step in the pattern of destiny. Carrie became a bona fide California. Father met his second wife, the remarkable Raymond, and I sometime later met Mr. Lewis Meadow Moulton over the counter at Father's store in El Toro. So she's jumping ahead a little bit, a few years. But she stayed with them, helped take care of Alta, and then at some point moved back to finish high school. Carrie stayed in California with Alta. But Alta passed away in 2 years. Nellie always loved learning, and so she continued. She finished high school, and she got a teaching credential. She took a business course from college, and going to the business course was a year long, so it was not a little thing. And she went in Omaha to take the class. She says, I recall during the ride at the fair, I took that newfangled contraption the horses carried, priced 50 cents for a drive around the ground. So that was the first time she'd ever been in a car.
What was 50 cents back then?
So, well, that's a great question. So my great-grandfather, Lewis, earned $1 a day in 1872, and I tried to look it up, and the statistics I found said that was about average for manual labor. So $1 a day for manual labor. So that's half a day's pay for a ride. So she started teaching, and I love this. I became so she took the place of a first-time teacher who was having trouble, and they put Nellie in place. I became well aware of the general word of disrespect in class and made sure to put things right with this especially insolent boy. One day I gave him the punishment he deserved, thrashing him in full view of the students. There was a minimum of trouble after that. It was different.
Oh, yeah, very.
I actually went to a one-room school with a teacher like this. And there was a big spoon on the blackboard. And if you were naughty, she would fill that with cod liver oil. And you had to drink that. That was in Julian. Yeah, it was the second to last one-room school in the state. Apparently we had first and eighth grade. They added rooms, unfortunately. It broke my heart. So now it's a three-room school. I still remember her yelling at me one time. I won't go into that. I don't think I ever had to drink that. I was a pretty good kid. That's what she would have looked like when she was teaching. She's sort of a chameleon. Some pictures, I have trouble recognizing her in her own pictures, frankly. You'll see. So Dad, once again, is trying to make things work. He's clearly a hard worker and a smart guy, but so he hears of an opportunity in Chelan, Washington, buys part of a business out there, goes out there, and it turns out that somehow he got swindled so that as owner of this company, he got all these debts that they had that he wasn't aware of. So he ended up losing his shirt on that deal. And he just basically closed everything and left. So once again, he doesn't have much luck in Washington State. But before he had found out all the bad news and closed shop, he had invited Nellie to come join him. He found an opportunity for her teaching better than he'd run. And so she came out and did that. And the book has a really fun story about how, there's a couple of minor romances in the book that she goes ahead and talks about. I can't think of the right word. The one was cute, someone from the newspaper whose initials were OK. She refused to give his actual name. But apparently in those days, NG meant no good. So they always played around with this, will NG ever become okay? That sort of thing. Probably. But it's a pretty fun little anecdote. I won't try to repeat it here. But John returns to California. I don't know how he heard of this job, but he got the job running an El Toro store, which was also the post office and a lot of other things. And Ellie visits him. He was only there for less than 3 years, but as she was working the counter, in comes this rancher. Yes, he's 24 years older than she is, but they hit it off, and she thinks that's it. This is where she was teaching, not necessarily one of these buildings, but in this town. I don't have all the names. I have a couple, but I'm not sure who's who. But for you, second from the left is Nellie Gale. You did this. And this is the El Toro store that John was running. So he gave her a big tour of Aliso Viejo and all these places. And so she goes back to Chelan and she starts painting in earnest. And she gets elected school principal. But Mr. Moulton, and she calls him Mr. Moulton throughout the book, came up to court her. And it's actually several years later, so it's kind of interesting. This was not the days of Tinder or whatever. And she tells him she'd really like to see the play Ben-Hur. I did some research, it's in our endnotes. Ben-Hur was one of the most impactful stories ever told. It was called Ben-Hur and the Story of Christ or something like that. You have the movie most of you have seen with Charlton Heston, 11 Oscars. But originally it was a book that sold over 1 million copies in the U.S., when the U.S. had 50 million people. And it sold so well that Sears Roebuck ordered 1 million more copies, the biggest order ever placed at that time. So when it sold those, and then it became this play. It was a huge hit, and got all kinds of accolades. So he had to pull all kinds of strings to get tickets to a sold-out show, but he managed to do it, impressed her, and that was their continued courtship. She was still saying okay now and then. She claims there was no romance there, but I think that explanation was NG. This is the oldest painting we have
Nice. Very nice.
from her. I'm sure there were a lot of things not as good, but yeah. You can see it's very sort of traditional oil painting, realism.
So when did she paint that? Do we have any idea?
My mom might have an idea, or maybe it's written on the back, but I didn't put it in there. This is what her later work generally looked like. It's not all ocean scenes. There's even one of Santa Anita racetrack, and the horses coming around, and a farmer burning a pile of brush in his field and things. But mostly it was landscapes.
She had a lot of these in one of the major pictures, there were a lot of seascapes.
A lot of seascapes, yeah. From different places, but hard to tell which places now.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
What year was she doing the seascapes, you know, what period?
She painted all the way until she died. But when did she exactly start? I don't know. That would be interesting. We could probably dig a lot of that up. So I thought I'd just show some good pictures. This is John Gale and his second wife, Minnie Raymond. And everybody loved Minnie. I don't have anecdotes. The book has a couple of anecdotes about her, but she was just very nice, very helpful. A lot younger also. And that's Carrie Gale and her husband, Fred Drews. And he actually was a tenant farmer, getting ahead of the story, but at Moulton Ranch, 1,000 of the acres. So it was a big piece of it that he was farming. And then when he was older, didn't want to work that hard, he ran the Moulton warehouse. I'll show you a picture of that later on. So she chose pretty well too. And that's where part one of the book ends. I thought I'd take questions if you have any for that part of it.
They were quite industrious, and they failed and succeeded, and failed again and succeeded. This says a lot about the family. They don't know the word no.
I think you're right, especially Dad.
I do have a question.
Yes.
On the screen, it said something about a train getting snowed in or something.
Oh, did I forget?
Yeah,
Yeah.
you didn't tell about that.
That was part of the whole OK and NG story. So they were going back from a gala to celebrate her as a principal. She, after a year, apparently she did a great job, and they threw a whole gala dance for her. And so she was going back to Seattle, and there was so much snow, the train was stuck for 24 hours.
Oh.
And I can't remember if that was where she met Mr. OK or the other man that she kind of liked. But anyway, they set up a whole card game and turned the benches around and just had a big kind of a party. It's a fun little story.
One of the things you brought to light, I always think about how hard it was to come from the east to the west. And thinking, oh, when they had the train, it was great to just hop on, but you were saying it's cold, they have to keep the windows open, all the soot that's coming in.
Right.
That puts a whole different dimension on how comfortable it was to go from the east to the west. It wasn't like you were coming out and it was a joy, it was a lot of work.
Very much so.
And I'm sure people that left healthy got here with a lot of congestion in it.
Exactly. I'll go into just a detail of that in a second.
Okay.
Kind of. Anything else? All right, so the book is divided into kind of 3 parts, plus the travel flight journal and the endnotes. Part 2 is pretty much her love affair with Lewis Moulton.
Here we go.
I don't have as many photos of that. And I didn't bring all of Lewis's story. The current exhibit at the Moulton Museum is all about him, and you can find it there. But I'll give you the bare bones. So, Lewis Fenno Moulton was born in Chicago, and his parents divorced at an early age and separated. And so he went with his mom back to her family. Her family was pretty well to do, as you can see from this house. They were primarily wool merchants, and they had a financial report called the Wool Report. And anyway, they had warehouses. They were quite well to do. It's funny because they've that doesn't fit. They've totally disappeared. We can't find any Fennos anymore, any records of Fennos. So I don't know what happened, but it's very interesting. But at the time, they were something. That's Irving. So Lewis's brother ended up, I believe, president of Bank of California. And it's really funny because we have a lot of letters from him to Lewis. We have almost none of Lewis's going out, of course, because other people got them, but we have the ones coming. And he would say things like, I hope you don't mind, but I needed some money, so I took $3,000 out of your account. Which he would, of course, be in jail for today. But things were a little looser then. He just pulled money out, and then later he'd ask for forgiveness later. That was when things were going well at this time period. So Lewis was another person who wanted to make it on his own and probably wanted to prove himself and so forth, because he could have had a pretty easy life there in Boston. But instead, when he was 20, he took a ship to the Isthmus of Panama and a train across. Panama Canal wasn't finished. And then another ship up to San Francisco, and then made his way down to Los Angeles, took a stagecoach, and got work. He had a letter of recommendation on the Irvine Ranch as a shepherd. So he was making $1 a day in Boston, working on Daniel Webster's farm, which is still a park. You can visit that. He came out presumably making the same, something similar out here. But he was very industrious, and he ended up with the manager of the Irvine Ranch leasing property and running sheep. And eventually he bought out the manager, whose last name was French. I don't know if any of you can help me. I can't remember his first name. I think it might be Jonathan, but I'm not sure. Anyway, probably not. That's what the Irvine Ranch barn looked like. And he originally rented, well, more and more, but he rented land all the way from Irvine to Long Beach. And he said the only building out there was his tent. That was it. So it was a real different world back then. And then that was a success. Of course, he had an inn. He had his family selling the wool. It's mainly the wool, not the meat, that made the money. And there were some reasons for that. There were some tariffs that helped keep other countries' wool from coming in and so forth. Anyway, long story short, they helped him get the best price he could get. So that helped him. And he rented Rancho Miguel from a guy named Cyrus Rawson, who I believe was the second owner. It was a Mexican land grant. And
Age period there is.
1895, he bought the ranch. So this would have been 1890, 1888. this is just something you can watch. It's an 8-minute movie that details how he came west, how he bought the ranch. It's on YouTube. Award-winning author wrote the script. But, you know, it sounds like it was a straight and narrow path, or maybe a wide and easy path. It was not. The Fennell family did not want him to buy the ranch. They argued against it. We have a couple dozen letters telling him he's a fool. It's in the middle of nowhere. You're going to borrow all this money and lose everything. He borrowed most of the money from them, but he borrowed from some other places. And right after, and then, all right, back up. This is not anywhere in the museum, so this is secret stuff. He was best friends with Cyrus Rawson. Cyrus Rawson agreed to buy it, to sell it for $75,000. He paid him $100,000.
Oh.
And his cousin, who was lending him most of the money, wrote a scathing letter about this. He agreed to sell it for this, and then he was kind of underhanded. He said, we only have the letter from the Fennells, but we know what he said because the letter that came back said, well, if you agreed and the family's honor is at stake, I guess there's nothing you can do but go ahead with this purchase. So he said, this is the family's honor on the line. You have to loan me enough to buy it for $25,000 more than you closed. And of course, the year after he bought it, there was a drought. And there are not good rain records from before that. It just started making pretty good records. But that was the biggest drought going forward for 125 years. And again, we have letters from different people. He was losing hundreds of sheep a day to dehydration, just dying all over the place. So they made the desperate decision to try to find pasture in the mountains. And they drove the sheep through the Mojave Desert up to Bishop. And they lost thousands. But he had 22,000. And I guess everybody else also drove their sheep up there. But they made it. And there's a good letter from his cousin saying, if you can hold out, a lot of these people are going to go broke, and the price is going to go back up. And so he actually stored all the wool in a warehouse, paid them, and then sold it when the price went back up. So his cousins really helped him survive. And that was, you know, insider trading kind of thing.
Bishop left it all, anything up there?
I did not, but I'm only able to search through telephone calls and email. I haven't physically gone there, but I don't know what would be left.
Yeah, probably not.
Maybe Cyrus Rawson actually moved there. He was waiting for the sheep when he said this great quote. So there might be something about him up there. And Cyrus Rawson had a bunch of great quotes, but I like this one. In the middle of the drought, we are like drowning men grasping for the same board, yet there's no use in whimpering. We give our troubles the most manful battle we can. So now I have a coffee cup that says there's no use in whimpering. But after that, his cousin in Boston convinced him that it would be really smart to take on a partner. His foreman somehow had money. Now, we don't really know, but I think he borrowed from other Basques. He was a Basque, and he bought a third of the ranch. So who knew that his hired man was possibly as wealthy as he was? At least he could borrow that much. So they became partners. He sold him a third interest in the ranch. So they were Basques. They were from the French part of Basque country. Interestingly, he spoke Spanish and wrote in Spanish. So I don't know why, but I know they speak both languages a lot in that area. Anyway, unfortunately, he didn't live that long. tractor rolled over him.
Oh,
1912, right by where their Costco is on Crown Valley.
Yeah, 20.
It says 20.
Oh, all right.
It's a long time.
Moving ahead.
He lived a long time.
Yeah, that's fun.
In 1912, and
That was a test, right?
it was probably because John Pierre passed away, because he was very much a sheep man, but maybe or no, they switched to cattle about that time. There may have been other pressures on the price of wool versus other kinds of fabrics and things. I don't know for sure. But John Pierre's daughter, Josephine, helped with the ranch. She's the littlest one on the left. And she became a manager with Nellie Gale of the whole enchilada when Mr. Moulton passed away. Just an interesting tidbit. I don't have much about this, but I'd love to do more research. But this has been mentioned by a few sources that a lot of the people shearing the sheep were Navajo. I don't know why the Navajo got into that business, but they would travel around the country shearing sheep. So I thought I'd just put that out there as a fun tidbit.
Well, that would be the wool on the sheep.
Oh.
Is all the sheep.
But yeah, there's like a naked sheep on our right, and on the left, there's it looks like a trough full of wool.
Yeah.
So this is not the most interesting telegram we have, but we have over 11,000 things like this in the collection over there. Letters, telegrams. We have the grant deed by Ulysses S. Grant saying, yes, we will honor the Mexican land grant. We're not going to confiscate that. That was a nice find. So it's a nice collection. We're sorting through it all the time. So I skipped ahead, kind of, but they did get married. They got married at the ranch house, which you'll see in a bit. And they took the first trip to Hawaii. That was one of their go-to places. They went there several times. And there's the honeymoon photo, 1908. And this is another honeymoon photo. I believe that hotel is still there.
It is.
Yep. And then that's Lewis in front of it. And I thought I'd throw in some photos of the ranch working. This is courtesy of First American. We borrowed a couple of their photos. And that's the Moulton warehouse. That's what Fred Drews managed. Now, interestingly, if you there's a place by the freeway, Sand Canyon and the 5. There's Noel's Cafe, which was a blacksmith shop, and there's Gracie's Jiu-Jitsu on the other end. And the warehouse there is not this one, but it looks almost exactly the same. And I think that maybe they were like, not exactly a kit, but they were from the same plans and the same design, because it's really, really close to what the Moulton warehouse would have looked like. That's worth a visit. Noel's, decent food, and it was a blacksmith shop, and there's some plaques and things you can check out the local history there. Yeah, probably.
And they have a museum too. But not in Old Town, it's out by the golf course, off of Culver.
Oh, yeah.
All right. So then they had 2 daughters, my grandma Charlotte and then Louise, and they were as different as 2 women can be. Charlotte was very girly from the beginning. I mean, almost every picture she has a giant bow. She has little rabbits. She's playing tea, and Louise was a complete tomboy. She rode horses from the beginning. She won awards at rodeos. just dressed, I don't think I ever saw her in a dress. Just completely different. And she ended up with 3 husbands. Although 1 or 2 of them died, so they didn't run away from her. Not sure. And then Charlotte had 1 husband and 3 kids. Louise had no kids. And then the Garrett's had no kids. With all those daughters, there were no children in there.
With the family questions, they ride a lot.
So Louise was the only one that loved riding in that generation. Mr. Moulton liked riding in a cart. What do you call it? Carriage.
Yeah.
And Charlotte could, but she didn't like it. Now in my generation, we have some people that won awards in rodeo. In fact, right now, Casey Mathis, who is my cousin's daughter, is often winning barrel races. She generally gets in the top 5 at least, and sometimes she wins. So it is in fact, when the Moulton Ranch was sold, I'm jumping ahead, but it was exchanged into 3 cattle ranches primarily. And so the family is still running cattle to this day, most of them. Me and my cousin are kind of the pariahs because we were like city folks, not farmers, no ranchers. There's the family. Family again. To me, Nellie looks way different in this picture than some of the others. That's the ranch house, which is by, it was El Torito. Apparently they've closed it. There's a Trader Joe's, fantastic bakery. His name is escaping me. Anyway.
Scratch Bakery, right?
Scratch Bakery. You're right. It's right there. And Avenida Carlotta was named after Charlotte. And Avenida de Luisa was named after Louise. And of course there's Moulton Parkway. The developers wanted to name a bunch of things after the family. And my grandpa thought that might risk kidnapping. Even in those days, apparently, people were worried about that sort of thing. So he wouldn't let them do it. But he allowed them to put the name Moulton because it was no longer the family name, and then these Spanish versions of the other names. Now, unfortunately, it's been torn down, this house. And that's, I don't know, maybe he regretted this the rest of his life, but he taught Louise how to ride, and she became the rodeo queen.
So
That's Mr. Moulton there. Yeah, was in front of the same ranch house.
I like the suspenders.
Yeah. So a little later, we happen to know she's on her way to the Ebell Club, which was a club for sort of women, I don't know what you'd say, but for women, we'll say. Yeah. That's where the award ceremony was for my riding. Yeah. All right. And she loved school and education, as I mentioned. So her daughter Charlotte graduated from Pomona in 1932, Louise in 1936. My mom, I don't know exactly when. And then Louis passed away in 1938. Yeah, that picture's in front of the same house. It's changed over the years. Later it was painted white, but same. I threw that in because she ran the ranch for 12 years with Josephine DeGuerre, and then she decided she wanted to travel. And she started her travels around the world, and then they say she went around the world, literally around the world, I think 4 times, and then a lot of other trips as well. A lot of countries that don't exist anymore, which is pretty fascinating. Their names are no longer the same, I should probably say.
You have this book, I can go through it to see what.
So I just threw in a couple of photos of her her travels. This was one that apparently was sort of impactful. The Women's Federation had a big to-do in Yosemite, and there was a big Native American, she called it India, of course, gathering with all kinds of different cultures represented and so forth, and it brought a lot of awareness to the poor treatment that had been given for decades, and I don't know if it did any good, but anyway, it was supposedly an impactful event that she went to see. And she went actually as part of the Ebell Club representation. I like this photo. Just a native in Peru, 1947, 2 years after the World War ended. Now this is interesting, because the watermarks show up. Are they showing up for you? Anyway, I think there's some little watermarks at the top. But,
Oh, I see. Oh.
yeah, there it is. I put this as a bonus because this is not in the book. She doesn't mention Thailand, so we didn't put this in, but I thought it was a good picture.
Oh, yeah.
So,
64.
they started selling off the ranch in 1962. I believe Leisure World was the first planned community in the world ever. That globe was eventually taken down for a fight about copyright, trademark, I guess it would be. The final Molten Ranch parcel was sold in 1976, except where the Molten Museum is on. Actually, there's 10 acres there that they kept, and there's a little strip mall, and that's part of what funds the museum.
Wow.
Now they're going to paint at Niagara Falls.
Careless.
No, that's between Canada and the United States on the East Coast. And that's my presentation. Other questions about that? Yes.
I was impressed to know that after Lewis died, that basically took over and ran everything. And that's quite remarkable in those times.
Yeah, I think so too. Don't have a lot to add to that.
But the fact that she really was a businesswoman and handled the ranch and they ran. I know they had